First of all, I'd like to thank the Foundation for inviting me to come and speak in Rome tonight and speak jacketless, which is a great pleasure since I'm a foreign correspondent and I never wear jackets. I'd like to start by basically saying that, as usual, I find that the most annoying thing about current events in the Middle East is reading my colleagues' work. In particular, the American press, which I think bears a heavier and heavier burden for the tragedies which we inflict upon the people of the Middle East and Southwest Asia. I should perhaps begin by saying that most of you will be unaware that Bashar al-Assad, the beloved president of Syria, has made another speech to the Syrian people this afternoon, about 2 hours ago. Remember that Syria has now lost up to 1,500 of its people who've been shot down, for the most part, by Syrian agents, the Shabiya, who are largely Alawite government and Syrian special security forces, run by Bashar al-Assad's brother, Maher. You'll be pleased to know that he has realized that something is wrong in Syria for the third time in 3 months. He's told the Syrian people that there must be a consultative meeting in a few days' time, that there will then be followed a meeting with 100 personalities to discuss mechanisms and then to try and introduce reforms. Now, how this will be regarded by the 1,500 victims' relatives, I cannot imagine. Assad has invited his people to return from their refugee exile in Lebanon and Turkey and return to these villages where their cattle have been killed, where their fields have been burned deliberately by the government, and where their relatives have been shot down while demonstrating. The most extraordinary thing of the Assad speech is he said, it's a conspiracy, amra in Arabic. It's a plot by a foreign hand. Thus, he follows all the other dictators in the Middle East. Ben Ali of Tunisia said it was a plot by a foreign hand. It was Al-Qaeda, of course. Mubarak said it was a plot by a foreign hand. In his case, it was Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, and possibly Mossad. Saleh of Yemen, he did one better. The plot against Yemen, he said, was an alliance of Al-Qaeda, the CIA, and Mossad. That's quite an alliance. That's quite something to keep going. Then we have Libya, where it's Al-Qaeda and the CIA who are against Gaddafi, according to Gaddafi. And now the foreign hand, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, according to Bashar al-Assad. Remarkable that the dictators still follow the same script as the previous men who've been hurled out of power. You know, the first thing that Mubarak's people did when the revolution began in Egypt, I prefer not to call it an Arab Spring. This is romantic. Revolutions don't always end happily. Look at the French Revolution, look at the Russian Revolution. But I call it an Arab Awakening, which was the title of a book by George Antonius, which first revealed the secret correspondence between the British and the King of Arabia to join the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. I actually stayed in Canada and France and Ireland because I couldn't report the war. If you can't be in a war, you shouldn't, be sitting on a hill watching it through binoculars. But our correspondent, Faraz Akram, was writing every day with great power. A Palestinian writing for a British national paper for the front page, because of course the Western journalists couldn't get there. The Israelis had blocked the Western journalists from going there. And thus, of course, what had happened is that the Palestinians acquired a voice in the national press in Britain. Faraz Akram, our correspondent, suffered a great tragedy. His wife was hourly expecting a child, and at the beginning of the Israeli invasion of 2008, 2009, his father was killed in an Israeli airstrike on their farm. In fact, here is our headline to show how a Palestinian could report the news: the death and life of my father. His father, in fact, was a member of the Palestinian Authority. He was a judge, spoke fluent English, a well-educated man. I'll just read you a few paragraphs to show you this is how citizen journalism began. Before the YouTubes, before the internets, before the tweets from Tahrir Square. The phone call came at around 4:20 p.m. on Saturday. a bomb had been dropped on the house at our small farm in northern Gaza. My father was walking from the gate to the farmhouse at the time. It was our beloved place, that farm and its two-story white house with a red roof. Nestled in a flat, fertile agricultural plain northwest of Beit al-Lahba, it had lemon groves, orange and apricot trees, and we had recently acquired 60 dairy cows. It was the closest farm to the northern border with Israel. Ironically, we always thought the biggest danger there was not from Israeli troops, who usually went straight past if they were mounting an incursion, but from stray Hamas rockets aimed at the Israeli towns north of us. But shortly after sunset on Saturday, as Israeli ground troops and tanks invaded Gaza in the name of shutting down Hamas rocket sites, the peace of that place was shattered and my father's life extinguished at the age of 48. Warplanes and helicopters had swept in, bombing and firing to open up the space for the tanks and ground forces that would follow in the darkness. It was one of those F-16 airstrikes that killed my father. The house was reduced to little more than powder, and of Dad there was nothing much left either. Just a pile of flesh, my uncle, who found him in the rubble, said later with brutal honesty. He finished his story with this paragraph. My grief carries no desire for revenge, which I know to be always in vain. But in truth, as a grieving son, I'm finding it hard to distinguish between what the Israelis call terrorists and the Israeli pilots and tank crews who are invading Gaza. What is the difference between the pilot who blew my father to pieces and the militant who fires a small rocket? I have no answers, but just as I'm about to become a father, I have lost my father. Now that is great journalism. Why don't I read that in the New York Times? Why don't I read that in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal? The people found their voice. Actually, because the Israelis prevented the Western journalists coming in to do 50-50 journalism. On the other hand, Israel says, etc. So there we had the authentic tragedy with an authentic voice from someone involved. And this American came forward and said, I don't know how you can say the American press are rubbish, slovenly and cowardly, Mr. Fisk. Are you saying the American press doesn't tell the truth? That it just listens to what the government says? So I produced the Wall Street Journal of the 21st of September 2010. I have heaps of other examples, but this happens to be the latest to hand. Here is an article, Defense Officials Predict Slow Afghan Progress. This at least has the merit of truth about it. It begins by Julian Barnes, Washington. Washington is a very good place to write about Afghanistan. And it begins, senior US military officials seeking to lower expectations of rapid progress in Afghanistan say they see few new significant gains in the war before the end of the year. Now I'll give you the sourcing of this extraordinary exclusive, this scoop in the Wall Street Journal. The sourcing is this. Senior US military officials say, military officials are playing down, said a senior US military official, column 2. Obama administration officials are lowering expectations. Defense officials say, they say, the senior military official said, military leaders say, the official said, military officials have also been managing expectations, the official said, many in the military say, the military officials said, officials want, according to military officials, officials plan. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is journalism, I don't have a job anymore. I don't know why the American newspapers don't just call themselves officials say, and they can fire all the journalists. I mean, you must have watched, the CNN and the CIA and that applies to the CNN and NBC and CBS, and the way in which they have the State Department correspondent and the White House correspondent. Well, the view in the State Department, Steve, is, and they have become this parasitic, osmotic relationship between power and the press. I don't know how you finish with that. I don't know how you deal with it. It pops up everywhere. Every time a new NATO commander is appointed, believe me, there is a British newspaper that refers to him as a soldier's soldier. Then he loses lots of men, the Taliban gain more grounds, a new NATO commander is appointed, and he's described as a soldier's soldier. There must be some good, by the way, in the Egyptian revolution. Tom Friedman, that frontier of American journalism, who charges $100,000 an hour for lectures. I charge nothing, by the way, though I would pay $100,000 not to listen to Tom Friedman. Tom's an old friend of mine. He came up to me in Cairo while I was having breakfast. Bob, how are you? Sit down. He said, something extraordinary happened yesterday. He said, a man came up to me, this is Tom Friedman speaking, on Tahrir Square, and he said, are you Robert Fisk? So I said to myself, so there is a revolution in Egypt. Maybe it'll work. But let me go back, if I may, to our friend Mr. Obama. Not Mr. Osama, but Mr. Obama. First of all, he loved the death of Osama. This was the man who did 9/11. I think probably correctly, he did, I think. But Osama, because of the Arab awakening, was out of date. He was yesterday's man. He had failed. It was Osama who told the people of the Muslim world, we will overthrow your leaders, the lick-spittle dictators who work for America and Zionism. He was going to get rid of Mubarak. He was going to get rid of Ben Ali. He was going to get rid of Assad. And he totally failed. The picture that the Americans released of him, bent down with a shawl and a cap, watching his own videotapes, oddly enough, that did capture the fact that Al-Qaeda has failed. It will still cause enormous suffering, of course, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. It has failed in its objectives. It did not work. It was the people of the Arab world and the people of Iran in the streets in 2009 after the election, and the people of Lebanon when they got the Syrians out of Lebanon in 2005. It was the people, as a secular people, who wanted freedom. Everyone in all those countries whom I spoke to said, we want to breathe.